Millionaire kissed a homeless girl to avoid a forced marriage. But what happened next left him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The chandeliers glistened like frozen waterfalls above the ballroom, every crystal catching the light as if the entire night sky had been trapped indoors. The scent of roses and expensive champagne hung heavy in the air. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits whispered behind their jeweled masks of politeness, waiting for the grand announcement. On the stage, a man stood at the center of it all, tall and immaculately dressed, the very image of control. He was the heir to one of the most powerful business empires in the country. And tonight, his family expected him to seal a future merger by announcing his engagement to the daughter of another billionaire dynasty. But behind his calm expression, his mind was a storm. His jaw clenched as his mother's perfectly manicured hand brushed his arm, urging him to step forward. He felt the weight of the microphone in his hand, but also the invisible chains of duty. In that suffocating moment, when all eyes burned into him, he saw her. At the farthest corner of the ballroom, almost invisible in the crowd of glitter and gold, stood a girl in a worn-out coat 2 sizes too big, clutching an old sketchbook to her chest. She was not supposed to be here. She looked fragile, almost out of place in this world of polished marble and diamonds. Her hair was messy from the autumn wind outside, her shoes cheap and scuffed, her expression one of someone who had learned to survive by blending into the background. And then it happened. The host announced the bride-to-be, and polite applause filled the room. Cameras flashed, the spotlight moved, and the young businessman felt his chest tighten like a cage closing in. A life chosen for him. A marriage not of love, but of business. He could not breathe. Without warning, he dropped the microphone. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. He moved quickly, weaving through the shocked crowd, ignoring his family's sharp whispers. And before anyone could stop him, he reached the corner where the girl stood frozen in confusion. "Play along," he muttered through clenched teeth. And before she could react, his hands cupped her face. He pulled her into a kiss long enough, reckless enough, that every guest, every camera, and every whispering critic saw it. The world went silent. Then, like glass shattering, the room exploded with gasps, flashes, and shrieks. The bride-to-be's family looked as if they had been slapped across the face. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father's eyes turned cold steel. Reporters surged forward, desperate to capture the scandal of the century. The girl's sketchbook slipped from her trembling hands, falling to the polished floor. She tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened, as if daring the entire world to question his choice. When he finally released her, her lips parted in shock, her eyes wide, her voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why me?" He straightened, turned to face the stunned crowd, and with a calmness that only deepened the chaos, said the words that would change both of their lives forever. "This is the woman I love." And in that instant, the world believed they had just witnessed the most scandalous beginning of a love story. The kiss had set the entire city ablaze. By the following morning, every newspaper headline screamed his name alongside blurry photographs of the mysterious girl in the worn coat. Online forums speculated about her background, tabloids invented wild stories, and paparazzi camped outside the mansion gates hoping to catch another glimpse of her. Inside the marble fortress of his family's estate, the young businessman sat in silence at the long dining table as his parents fumed. His father's voice thundered. "You humiliated this family. You destroyed years of negotiation with the Lockwood family in one reckless stunt." His mother's eyes glared like sharpened glass. "Who is she? Where did you even find such a girl? Do you have any idea what you have done?" But he said nothing. His spoon tapped once against the porcelain bowl before he set it down, pushed back his chair, and left the room without a word. Later that evening, in a dim cafe far from the estate, the girl sat with her sketchbook clutched tightly, her hands trembling as though the weight of the world had fallen into her lap. When he entered, dressed down in a simple coat rather than his tailored suit, she almost did not recognize him. The air between them carried the tension of two strangers tied by a scandal neither of them had planned. She spoke first, her voice raw. "Why did you do that? You could have ruined my life. I have nothing, and now the entire world is staring at me." He studied her face, the exhaustion beneath her eyes, the cracked edges of her nails that betrayed how hard survival had been. Then he leaned closer across the small table. "Because I needed a way out. My family wants me chained to a loveless marriage, and I refuse to be their pawn. You were there, and in that moment, you were my only choice." Her eyes flashed with disbelief. "So I was just convenient to you?" "Listen," he replied firmly. "This scandal is not going away. Reporters will not stop until they know who you are. My family will hunt you down, and the world will tear you apart with their lies. But if you agree to something, we can turn this to our advantage." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" He pulled out a crisp envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. Inside was a simple contract. His words were steady, rehearsed like a man who had already fought this battle in his mind. 6 months. You will pretend to be my wife. In public, we will act as though this kiss was not a scandal but the beginning of a secret love that I have decided to reveal. In private, we will keep to ourselves. At the end of 6 months, I will make sure you are safe, financially secure, and free from the media storm. You can walk away with enough to rebuild your life." She stared at the papers, then at him. "Why me? You could have hired any actress, any socialite willing to play along." His voice softened, almost too quiet for her to hear. "Because you looked real. Because in that room filled with masks, you were the only one who did not belong. And yet you did not try to pretend. That was the first honest face I had seen in years." Her throat tightened. The offer was surreal. Money, safety, stability, things she had dreamed of but never dared to hope for. Yet the danger was clear. If she stepped into his world, she would not only be a homeless girl with a sketchbook anymore, she would become the target of every cruel word, every headline, every jealous rival who wanted to see her destroyed. Her hands shook as she reached for the contract. "What happens if I say no? Then you will face this storm alone," he answered without hesitation. "My family will bury you, and the press will devour you. But if you say yes, I will make sure no one can touch you." The cafe's dim light flickered above them, casting shadows across their faces. For a long time, silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible choices. Finally, she whispered, "I have a younger brother. He is sick. He needs treatment that I cannot afford. If I agree, can you promise me he will be taken care of?" His gaze locked on hers. "Yes, that will be my first priority." Her breath quivered as she looked down at the contract again. The paper felt heavier than stone, and with a trembling hand, she picked up the pen that lay beside it. The ink on the contract was barely dry when her world changed overnight. One evening, she was shivering on a park bench with her sketchbook as her only shield against the cold. The next morning, she was standing in the grand foyer of his mansion, surrounded by marble pillars and chandeliers that seemed to mock her worn shoes. The butler's eyes widened at her arrival, and the housemaids exchanged curious glances, whispering behind polished hands. To them, she was a stranger who had suddenly become the lady of the house. He walked past the staff without hesitation, his presence commanding, his voice steady. "From today, she is my wife. Show her the same respect you would show me." His words silenced every whisper. Then, without waiting for a reply, he climbed the grand staircase, leaving her to stand in the overwhelming silence of the mansion. Her room was larger than any place she had ever called home. The bed was wide enough to fit her entire world, and the windows opened onto gardens where fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Yet when she touched the velvet curtains and the polished oak desk, she felt no comfort. She clutched her old sketchbook tightly, the single thread of familiarity in a space that seemed too perfect, too untouchable. That first dinner was a battlefield of manners. The table stretched so far she could barely see him at the other end. Servants filled her plate with foods whose names she did not know, cutting steaks into precise slices and placing crystal glasses of wine she had never tasted. She reached for the wrong fork, her hand trembling, and the sound of silverware clattering against porcelain echoed in the quiet room. Her cheeks burned with shame. He looked up, his gaze cold but steady. Relax. No one here is grading your performance. His words stung, not because of their harshness, but because she could not tell if they were meant to comfort or to mock. She lowered her eyes and whispered, I am not used to any of this. Me too. For a brief second, his expression softened, but just as quickly the mask returned. You will learn. The world is watching now. Days turned into weeks, and life under the same roof was a strange mixture of distance and unspoken connection. He worked long hours in his study. Surrounded by contracts and business calls, she wandered the mansion's endless hallways, sketching corners of the garden, the curve of the staircase, or the chandelier that reminded her of frozen rain. She found solace in her drawings, though the maids often looked at her with pity, as if she were a bird trapped in a golden cage. Their interactions were brief and charged. Once, she accidentally spilled coffee across his desk while trying to leave him a sketch she had drawn of the garden. The liquid stained important documents, and his sharp voice cut through the air. Do you have any idea what you have done? She stammered an apology, clutching her sketchbook to her chest as if it could shield her. He sighed, the anger fading as quickly as it had come, and with surprising gentleness, he handed her a clean cloth. Next time, knock before you enter. Another evening, she found herself in the kitchen long after midnight, searching for something simple to eat. To her surprise, he walked in, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He did not order the chef. Instead, he cracked eggs into a pan, the sound sizzling in the silence. You are awake too? He asked without looking at her. She nodded. When he placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her, she whispered, Thank you. He only replied, Do not get used to it. But she noticed the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. The world outside, however, was relentless. Newspapers splashed photographs of them, side by side, analyzing every glance, every gesture. Was this truly love, or a carefully crafted performance? Society questioned, and the pressure grew. His family's disapproval was a constant shadow, their disdain dripping from every forced dinner conversation. Yet within the walls of the mansion, a fragile rhythm began to form between them. She remained cautious, never forgetting the contract that bound them, but in quiet moments, she wondered if there was more hidden beneath his polished armor. And though he never said it, the way his eyes lingered on her when she was lost in a sketch suggested that he too was beginning to wonder. The longer she stayed in the mansion, the heavier the outside world pressed in. What had begun as whispers turned into relentless storms. Every morning, the tabloids screamed her name with headlines laced in venom. The homeless girl who stole a billionaire's heart, gold digger or secret heiress. Photographs of her awkward smiles, her clumsy steps, and even her trips to the grocery store were splashed across glossy covers. Strangers she had never met dissected her every move, debating her worth as if she were a commodity. Inside the estate, the tension was no less suffocating. His parents treated her presence as an insult carved into the family's legacy. At dinners, his father's silence was sharper than any blade, while his mother's words dripped with condescension. Such an unusual choice of attire, she would remark, her eyes scanning the second-hand dress as though it were a crime. One would think a woman in your position would make an effort to look presentable. She would lower her gaze, forcing her trembling hands to stay still on the table. Each insult lodged in her chest like a stone, yet she bit back her tears. She had endured worse in alleys and shelters, but enduring it in a gilded cage, in front of chandeliers and silver platters, made the humiliation burn deeper. And then there were the spies. She began to notice unfamiliar faces lurking near the gates, strangers who followed her discreetly when she stepped outside. Once, as she walked through a bookstore trying to hide beneath a hood, she caught sight of a man snapping photographs with a long lens. Panic raced through her veins, but before she could flee, he appeared beside her, his presence towering, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Stay close," he commanded, guiding her out of the store and into his car. As the door shut behind them, she clutched her sketchbook to her chest. "They are everywhere. I cannot even breathe." His jaw tightened. "That is exactly what they want. Do not give them the satisfaction of seeing you break." She turned to him, her eyes shining with anger and fear. "Easy for you to say. You have grown up in this world. I am drowning in it." For the first time, his stern facade cracked. He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His voice, low. "I know what it is like to feel cornered. I have been trapped my entire life by expectations I never asked for. But you still have a choice. Do not let them take that from you." His words lingered, but the reality was harsher than any comfort. His family had hired investigators, determined to dig into her past. Every night, she lay awake in the enormous bed, wondering when her secrets would surface. The thought of her brother's frail body in a clinic bed haunted her. What if the truth destroyed everything before she could secure his treatment? One evening, she overheard a conversation in the study. His father's voice thundered through the door. "End this charade. The girl is nothing but a distraction. The board is restless. The investors are questioning your judgment, and our partners are threatening to pull out. End it before she drags us all down." There was silence. Then his voice, calm but edged with defiance. "This is my decision, my life, and I will not be forced into a cage just to please your shareholders." The door creaked, and she stumbled back, her heart racing. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but his words struck her deeply. For the first time, she saw not only a powerful heir, but also a man fighting for his own freedom, even as the world tried to strip it away. The pressure mounted day by day, until it seemed the walls themselves were closing in. Yet even in the storm, small moments anchored her. The way he shielded her from the paparazzi with his own body, the way his gaze lingered on her sketches with unspoken admiration, the way he stood taller whenever the world tried to push her down. Still, she knew it was only a matter of time. Secrets could not stay buried forever, and when the truth surfaced, the fragile balance they had built would shatter. The night of the charity gala arrived, a glittering affair that filled the city's grand hotel with music, champagne, and polished smiles. She had dreaded the event from the moment the invitation arrived, but refusing was not an option. Under the blazing chandeliers, her second-hand gown felt like paper among silk and diamonds. The stares followed her the moment she entered, each whisper sharper than the last. "They say she was found on the streets," one woman hissed behind a jeweled fan. "Imagine the shame of this family," another sneered. She kept her chin up, clutching her sketchbook hidden in her bag, her only shield in a hostile world. He walked beside her, his expression unreadable, his presence both armor and cage. Cameras flashed, and for a moment, she forced herself to breathe, to pretend she belonged. But the night took a cruel turn. As the band struck up a slow waltz, she slipped away to the balcony for air. The cool wind was a relief. Until the sharp scent of liquor reached her. A man, his tie loose and his eyes glassy with drink, cornered her. His laughter was slurred, his grip on her wrist rough. "So you are the famous stray cat the billionaire picked up. Tell me, what trick did you use? Maybe I could buy a little of your act." She pulled back, her voice shaking. "Let me go." "Oh?" But he tightened his grip, leaning closer, his words foul and mocking. Fear surged through her chest, old memories of dark streets and danger threatening to drown her. She struggled, her sketchbook slipping from her bag, pages scattering across the marble floor. Then, in a sudden rush of movement, he was there. The businessman shoved the drunk back with a force that echoed against the balcony rail. His eyes burned with fury, his voice low and dangerous. "Touch her again, and I will make sure you never step foot in this city's circles again." The drunk stammered, sobered by the raw authority in his tone, before stumbling away into the shadows. The air hummed with silence after his departure. She dropped to her knees, gathering the scattered sketches with trembling hands. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing against hers as he picked up a torn page. It was a drawing of the mansion's garden, delicate lines filled with quiet beauty. For the first time, his cold mask cracked. He looked at her, not as an obligation, not as a contract, but as someone who carried an entire world inside fragile pages. "You draw these?" His voice was softer now. She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "It helps me breathe when everything feels too heavy." He studied the page for a long moment before returning it to her, his expression unreadable but changed. Then he rose, offered his hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. Back inside the ballroom, whispers erupted. People had seen the confrontation. Rumors would spread like wildfire by morning. But for the first time since their bargain began, he did not hide. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back and guided her across the floor, daring anyone to question him. When the music swelled again, he leaned close and said quietly, "You are stronger than you realize. Do not let them break you." And though the contract still bound them, though the storm outside still threatened, in that moment she saw a glimpse of the man beneath the armor. A man who, despite the walls built around him, had chosen to stand beside her when the world tried to tear her down. After the night of the gala, something shifted between them. The contract still defined the rules, but the distance that once stretched like a canyon began to narrow. For the first time, silence in the mansion no longer felt suffocating. It felt watchful, filled with the unspoken weight of two lives drawing closer. One morning, she found herself in the garden, sketchbook balanced on her knees as she traced the outline of the fountain. The early sun caught in her hair, and she was so absorbed in her drawing that she did not hear his footsteps until he spoke. "You always sit here." "Abu." She startled slightly, looking up to find him watching her, coffee cup in hand. "It is the only place that feels real," she admitted. "Everything else in this house feels like it belongs to someone else." He studied her for a moment before sitting beside her, his suit brushing against the stone bench. "You have a way of making this place look alive," he said, glancing at the sketch. His tone carried no mockery, only quiet sincerity. Later that week, rain swept across the city, trapping them indoors. Power flickered, and the mansion seemed less like a fortress and more like a cavern echoing with shadows. In the kitchen, she lit candles while he rummaged through cabinets. To her surprise, he set a small pot on the stove. "Do you know how to make soup?" he asked. She blinked at him, amused. "Do you?" He smirked faintly. "We will find out." What followed was chaos. He burned the onions, she spilled the broth, and both laughed more than either expected. When the final pot of soup steamed between them, it tasted imperfect but warm. Sitting across the counter, candlelight flickering across their faces, the walls between them cracked a little more. Another evening, she stayed up late, her sketchbook spread across the bed as she worked on a portrait. The door creaked, and he appeared, his tie loosened, fatigue heavy in his posture. "You are still awake?" She nodded, hesitating before turning the sketch toward him. It was his face, captured not in power or control, but in the quiet vulnerability she had glimpsed on the balcony the night of the gala. His breath caught, and he looked at her as if seeing himself for the first time. "You drew this?" She lowered her gaze. "I just wanted to remember the moment when you were human." Instead of anger, a faint smile curved his lips. He took the page gently, careful not to smudge the lines. "No one has ever looked at me that way before." Days passed, and their paths intertwined in unexpected ways. He began to notice her routines, the way she lingered by the library shelves, the way she paused to feed the stray cat that prowled near the gates, the way her laughter, rare but genuine, seemed to soften even the coldest corners of the house. She, in turn, began to see the cracks in his armor. Beneath the sharp suits and calculated words was a man who carried loneliness like a shadow. She caught him late at night, sitting in his study with the lights off, staring at old photographs of his childhood. She never asked, and he never explained, but the silence between them spoke louder than words. One afternoon, he surprised her by handing her a small box wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a set of charcoal pencils, finer than any she had ever owned. Her hands trembled as she lifted them. "Why?" His answer was simple. "Because you deserve tools worthy of your talent." The contract still loomed over them, and the storm of scrutiny outside had not lessened. But inside the mansion, moments of warmth began to take root like fragile blossoms. They did not speak of love, not yet, but in every glance, every shared laugh, every quiet gift, the seeds of something deeper had been planted, and neither of them could ignore it any longer. The fragile peace they had built did not last. For weeks, whispers swirled in the press, but now they had teeth. A private investigator hired by his family finally uncovered the truth they had both feared. One morning, the headline screamed louder than ever. "Billionaire's wife exposed." Once a homeless girl living in train stations, the world devoured the story. Photographs of her curled up on a station bench, grainy images of her begging for coins near a convenience store, even police records of nights she had been taken to shelters. Every wound of her past was laid bare for strangers to mock. Inside the mansion, silence reigned heavier than thunder. The staff avoided her eyes, their courtesy stretched thin beneath their curiosity. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her sketchbook so tightly the paper bent under her grip. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "It is over. They will never let me stay now." When he entered the room, his expression was unreadable. He held the morning paper, the ink still fresh, the cruel headlines glaring. For a long moment, he said nothing. She could not bear the weight of his silence. "You see?" she cried, tears slipping down her cheeks. "This is who I really am. A girl from the streets. I never belonged here, not with you, not in this world of glass and gold." Her words cracked something deep inside him, but before he could speak, the door opened. His father stormed in, his voice ablade. "This circus ends today. You will annul this ridiculous arrangement before the board loses every ounce of respect for our name." His mother stood behind him, her lips pressed in triumph. She lowered her eyes, shame burning her from the inside out. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to escape before she dragged him down any further. She rose, clutching the sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "Perhaps they are right," she whispered. "Perhaps I should go." But as she moved toward the door, his hand caught hers, firm and unyielding. His eyes locked on hers with a fire she had never seen before. "No, you are not running. Not this time." His father's face darkened. "If you defy us, you will lose everything. The company, the inheritance, your name." But he cut him off, his voice ringing with finality. "Then let it be lost, because I would rather stand beside her with nothing than stand alone with everything." Her breath caught, her heart trembling at the weight of his words. For the first time, he was not protecting her because of a contract, not because of obligation, but because he chose her. Still, the storm outside was only beginning. The world had seen her scars, and the backlash was merciless. Whether their fragile bond could withstand it remained uncertain. The storm reached its peak the day of the press conference. The ballroom of the downtown hotel was filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and the heavy scent of scandal. Every outlet in the city had gathered, waiting for blood. The whispers were cruel, predicting humiliation, predicting her quiet removal from his life. She stood just beyond the curtain, her hands trembling around her sketchbook. Her knees threatened to buckle under the weight of 1,000 eyes that would soon judge her. She whispered to herself, "I should not be here. They will tear me apart." Then he stepped beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His voice was low but unyielding. "You will not face them alone." The master of ceremonies announced his name, and the crowd erupted with a storm of shudders and lights. He walked to the podium, his suit sharp, his posture proud. She followed, every step echoing like thunder in her chest. The whispers grew louder. "Is that really her? She looks nothing like a millionaire's wife. A fraud, plain and simple." The words cut, but before they could pierce deeper, he raised his hand, commanding silence. His voice carried through the room, firm and resonant. "You want the truth? Then hear it now. Yes, she was once homeless. Yes, she lived in train stations and shelters. And yes, she came from nothing." Gasps rippled across the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. His eyes burned with defiance as he continued. "But what none of you understand is that strength is not born from wealth. It is born from survival, from dignity, from facing a world that looks down on you and refusing to break. She has more courage and honesty than anyone I have ever met in these circles of privilege." He reached for her hand, lifting it before the cameras, his grip unshakable. "This is the woman I love, not because of her past, but because of who she island. If you cannot accept that, then it is your prejudice that should be questioned, not her worth." The room erupted, flashes blinding, voices shouting questions, some supportive, many outraged. Yet through the chaos, he stood firm, his declaration echoing beyond those walls into every home, every television, every screen. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, her heart pounding. For the first time, he had stripped away every mask, every pretense. This was no longer a contract, no longer a performance. This was his choice, his stand. And in that moment, The girl who once hid in shadows understood that love was not found in the absence of storms, but in the courage to face them together. The press conference changed everything. The headlines the next morning were divided. Some branded him reckless, others hailed him as brave. But among the storm of opinions, a different voice began to rise. Ordinary people who saw themselves in her story. Messages flooded social media, not of scorn, but of admiration. She survived the streets. She deserves happiness. Finally, someone who is real in a world of fakes. The tide had begun to turn. Back at the mansion, the air was heavy with silence. His parents avoided her, their disapproval sharp as ever. But they could no longer erase what he had declared to the world. The board raged, investors threatened, yet his decision stood firm. He had chosen her, and there was no undoing it. One evening, she sat on the balcony, sketchbook open, trying to capture the skyline glowing against the night. He stepped outside, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, they stood in quiet, the weight of the past months hanging between them. Then he spoke, his voice steady, no longer the voice of a man trapped by duty. When we began this, it was nothing but a contract. A way to escape chains neither of us wanted. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing it as an arrangement. I started seeing you. Her breath caught, her pencil slipping from her fingers. He took her hands, the same hands once chapped and trembling from cold nights, now trembling for a different reason. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside, a ring glimmered. Not ostentatious, but elegant, a symbol rather than a show. I do not want this to end as a deal. I want this to begin as a choice, my choice, our choice. Will you marry me not because the world is watching, not because of contracts or scandals, but because you are the only woman I want by my side? Her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, the girl who once slept under bridges and clutched a sketchbook to survive could not believe the man before her was asking her to be his future. But then she realized it was not about mansions or money. It was about the nights he had stood in front of her when the world attacked, the quiet gifts, the unspoken care. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking but clear. Yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him. The city lights blurred behind her tears. And for the first time, she felt at home not because of where she was, but because of who she was with. The contract that once bound them had ended. What remained was real, raw, and chosen. Love, not born of wealth or obligation, but of courage, kindness, and truth. And as they stood together beneath the night sky, hand in hand, the girl who once had nothing, and the man who once had everything, found the only thing that truly mattered each other.